someone else wanted to talk about who's had not the greatest weekend.
I was going to say,
not for the first time.
Talk about distances away from teammates, then this is probably...
Checo Perez, 7
The man who's second in the 2023 World Drivers' Championship.
Yep.
Just.
I was going to say...
Not by much. It's 29 points, I think, to Hamilton.
No, not by as much as it should be. Yeah. It's literally 29.
Is it 33? Okay, 33. Oh, yeah, because,
It's going up. Brilliant.
33 points to Hamilton.
Stonks.
Sergio Perez, another poor weekend. And I did, once the race finished, I put a little poll out on my Twitter. And I just wanted to ask, whose season was worse? Maybe a bit of a recency bias here.
I was going to say,
Albon 2020 or Perez 2023. And with 7,760 votes, 81% are saying Perez 2023.
Yeah, look,
There's a lot of recency bias.
The stats don't lie, though. Get me.
Sorry, I had to put that one
You're
out.
asking F1 to of all places.
Yeah, which is
Expecting to get a
source,
reasonable
trust me, bro. Look, I think that it was such a bad weekend for Checo. Such a bad weekend for Checo. Like,
unfortunate at the start. Just a concertina, like a lot of people in one space, 4 guys going for the one piece of road. Could have easily been Hamilton who had that damage instead of him. What it is. Race lap 1 incident, fine. But qualifying, you're too far away. You shouldn't have even been in that position in the first place. Got a fucking awful, he got a horror start. So that's why he's even in that position in the first place.
Yeah.
And then the move on Magnussen, I'm not even, like, I'm not exaggerating.
Last week.
It is one of the worst attempts at overtake I've ever seen in my life.
It was bad.
I'm genuinely, like, given the context of your car is so much quicker.
You know what poll you should put up? Which move was worse? The one on Albon or the one on Magnussen?
Yeah.
Both
50,
On
shocking.
Sonoda as well.
See what F1 Twitter is saying.
Well, on Sonoda, I mean, that's like 3 incidents with other drivers in probably the space of about 60 racing laps.
Yeah.
I mean, when you've got that kind of car, and again, like, qualifying pace has been an issue. Race pace hasn't been much of an issue for Checo. Like, typically he's been better in race pace. Still not great, but better.
Yeah.
Just be patient. Just pick your spot, make your way through.
Baby.
I mean, you can make moves into that corner. We saw multiple drivers chucking it up the inside, but you need to be at least somewhat close to the back of the car before you do
You
it.
need to be in the same area code before you do it.
And he locks up and contact, and then...
And especially when you have such a car advantage. I mean, it was
Tyres that have fallen off in 2 laps.
it was a howler, it was a stinker, it was a honker. There's not enough superlatives to describe that performance. And I said actually on the stream, I think that's probably his worst ever race in Formula One. Retired twice. And that's one for the history books.
Yeah, that was crazy, by the way. Red Bull bringing him back out of the pit
To serve
lane
his
just to serve a penalty and then retire him again is
I've never seen that.
all-time great moments in Red Bull history.
I don't even know where you'd even pin it down to or what you pin it down
I don't
to,
get
it's
it.
not the start of the season when, the points are relatively equal and he's trying to make a championship challenge again. I mean, that lasted about 4 races at the start of the year and pretty much it died after Miami.
Is it purely confidence? Can it just be purely confidence?
Is he under
do
much
that.
pressure?
Like now he knows he's secure.
His seat's secure.
He's
like,
secure, but at the
won the
same time,
constructors.
it's always at the back of your mind. Like, there's a lot of, I'm probably going to get replaced by Ricciardo at some point. I want to try and prove myself. Maybe that's affecting him somewhat.
Yeah.
But Checo is a proven quality driver. Like, the years he's been in F1, the podiums with Force India, Monaco, Azerbaijan, great job at Sauber. 2020, he was unreal. Like, arguably he was, him, Lewis and Ricciardo. And it's funny that, Perez and Ricciardo since then have had 2 pretty poor times of it. But, right up there in terms of, caliber of driver, he was right to replace Albon.
I think it's purely
Red Bull
pressure.
had to pick him up.
I still think he's a quality driver. Like, you put him in that McLaren, that Aston Martin, and Alpine, kind of that level. I think he still does a really solid job.
But he's already talking about options for 2025 outside of Red Bull.
He's the one that started. Now he's starting the conversation. Like, I might leave
because he knows, he knows what it's like to be dropped mid-contract, because that's what happened to him at Racing Point. And I mean, Red Bull are the most cutthroat team on the grid. It's just, I just don't understand it, because he is a quality driver with a lot of experience, and it's just not showing at all.
I mean, when you look back and talk about, the Racing Point in 2020, I think that was the car that suited him best. And I always say, like, you only see the best of a driver in a car that they're completely synonymous with. So like Max with the RB19 this year, Max with pretty much any car you give him, he does as much as he can with it. But Checo really struggles with the amount of oversteer that the Red Bull currently, the way they design the car is obviously to maximize speed, but it doesn't necessarily play to Checo's strengths because he likes a little more understeer and likes typically shorter corners, I think it is, which is why he does so well around street circuits, whereas Verstappen doesn't do not so well, but there's a bit, the gap.
The gap's just a little bit closer.
And
like even in Singapore, as bad as that was, I was saying, Singapore from Sergio is like one of the closest races compared to Max. It's crazy.
And I think as well, like, in some ways, his experience kind of goes against him in the same way that Ricciardo's experience went against him at McLaren, because he was so conditioned to a certain style of car, Ricciardo, in the Red Bull and the Renault, where he got the Renault to a good place where it worked with his style.
Yeah.
And then McLaren, like, he wasn't able to change. He had to think about his driving. He couldn't drive on instinct. But Oscar's come in is super young, super fresh. So, you're more, I guess, pliable to, working with different...
Working with what
working with what you're given, exactly. So
you don't actually know what your style of Formula 1 car is, because it's very different to a Formula 2 or Formula 3 car. So you're more malleable or pliable or whatever,
look, one thing, again, this is, I know you mentioned this and got a bit of, but like, is it out of the question to consider Lawson alongside Verstappen because he is younger and potentially more likely to adapt to that style of car, kind of like how Oscar's adapted to the McLaren, even though the McLaren is a weird car to drive. Like, Science has talked about it, Lando's talked about it. Ricciardo, he experienced it and showcased it to the world, just how, it can be a really tricky car. Like,
yes, it's out of the question.
I mean,
I don't know.
It wouldn't have been out of the question if they'd actually put him in the AlphaTauri for next season.
Yeah, it's a gamble for sure.
I think if they put him in the
what's there to
AlphaTauri
lose?
for next
Because
season...
Perez is not doing, like, I think there's lots of drivers who would do no worse than Checo in this Red Bull right now.
I think
I do.
The problem is you've got to look at it, I think, from a more long-term perspective. Like, Liam Lawson, for me, is, so far, given they've slapped him in an AlphaTauri and he's actually beaten Yuki, I think, at every Grand Prix, but Yuki's obviously had technical issues at Monza and Singapore. The technical issue at Singapore being Sergio Perez's sidepod. But he's definitely impressed. But I think he's probably the only Red Bull Junior that I could see right now that has the potential to actually end up in a Red Bull. Iwasa's good. Maloney's good, but you're going to have to see how they do next
Lawson's
season.
proved it. Lawson's proved in an F1 car he can be competitive.
That he can do
already.
The business. If you're Red Bull, don't rush another young driver into a Red Bull car because you will ruin him.
I could see Helmut waking up one day.
I can see it happening, no doubt. But is it the right thing to do?
First of all, my client has an ironclad contract for next season, so Checo is not going anywhere. But no, joking aside, just don't stun like Lawson's growth. I mean,
just let him develop it.
Just let him develop at AlphaTauri. Like, you do not just. What have we learned from like putting Gasly and Albon in there?
Would be funny though, to be fair.
It would be hilarious. It would be brilliant.
Should we do it?
Imagine if he beats Verstappen as well. Brilliant. But
Liam Lawson wins.
Liam Lawson's actually the guy. But no, and also hilarious for Ricciardo. He wants that Red Bull seat so bad. He gets the AlphaTauri seat. Lawson gets it in front of him. Brilliant.
Yeah,
but no, I don't see a single universe where that ends up well. Honestly.
That's like Doctor Strange shit. There's no universe.
I'm looking into all of them, and Lawson
finishes eighth in all of them.
His reputation would be even worse than what Albon's was at the end of 2020, because at least Albon had that kind of body of work to bounce back on.
No, look, you're right, and I think Williams took a shot on Albon, and there was no guarantee. I was confident he'd do well, but I'm biased, so of course I was.
And to be honest, like, Albon's second half of 2020 wasn't even that bad. Remember, he got Rook of the Year that year, based off of,
Oh, God, yeah. His second half of 2019.
2019.
Yeah. Oh, mate, yeah, he was quality.
He was really good.
That's my bad.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it. I wouldn't rule it out of the question.
No, I think the thing is, I do wonder, Lawson, well, they're all like Red Bull employed drivers at the end of the day, so they're kind of free to do what they want at the end. But yeah, I think that would maybe be a bridge too far. I do wonder if next year, I said this again, like, if there are other teams somewhat competitive with Red Bull on a car basis, that will, Checo, they've got a clear car and you can't rely on Checo to qualify a P2 like nowhere near every race.
Yeah.
So imagine if everyone else catches up, they are going to have to rely on Max on his own to do the job. But like you said, Ben earlier, arguably that is the better way to do it. Better to just rely on Verstappen and not have any inter-team beef.
It's the better way to do it when you have a dominant car. But
if they don't have a dominant car,
if anyone at all challenges Red Bull next season, they're in trouble. Because Sergio Perez can't do that.
For the constructors.
For the constructors, obviously for the drivers, Max Verstappen will probably, and I suppose that's.
I mean, Max is winning the constructors by himself already.
There's 7 points between P1 and 2.
But all I'm saying is, if McLaren turn up with a car, I'm not saying this is going to happen, by the way, it's just hypothetical. But if McLaren turn up with a car next season that's as good as Red Bull's,
is that what Lando's been telling you?
Next question. No. If that was to happen, Red Bull are suddenly that clear 1-2 dynamic where Sergio Perez is so far off that it's fine because at least they're not battling each other, kind of falls apart. Because if Checo's finishing 7th in a Grand Prix, McLaren could be getting a 1-2 or a 2-3 or something, and then you're actually in danger in the Constructors' Championship. It depends what they value more, drivers or constructors, really.